All right, today we're tackling a really pivotal moment in history. We're talking about the exact point when the Bible transformed from this book of a persecuted minority into the foundational text of an empire. So, yeah, let's dive right in.
And really, this entire explainer hangs on one huge question. I mean, what actually happens when a tradition that was persecuted, that was hunted down, suddenly becomes the official imperial religion? What happens when you're handed the keys to the kingdom? Well, as you're about to see, this shifts. It changes absolutely everything.
Okay, so to really get just how massive this change was, we've got to go back to the beginning. We need to look at what Christianity was like before all the power, when it was just a minority faith trying to survive.
For the first few hundred years, being a Christian was, well, it was precarious. These communities were scattered across the massive Roman Empire, and they were basically walking a tightrope. I mean, one day you might be tolerated, but the next, depending entirely on the mood of the emperor, you could be facing intense persecution. It was this constant, volatile reality they lived in. But then, the 4th century rolls around, and everything, and I mean everything, gets turned on its head. This is what we call the imperial turn. It's this one decisive moment where the whole relationship between the faith and the state gets completely rewritten.
And what's just staggering about all this is how fast it happened. Seriously, look at this timeline. You go from centuries of being a minority group, often on the run, to suddenly getting official recognition, and then, boom, by the end of that same century, it becomes the dominant state-enforced religion. All of that inside a single century. It's just a mind-blowingly fast climb to power.
So you have this massive political revolution, right? But it wasn't just about emperors and laws. It had a huge, profound effect on the Bible itself. The book goes from being a private text read in the corners of small house churches and gets thrust right into the center stage of the empire. And this right here, this is the real game changer. We're talking about a fundamental shift in the Bible's job, its whole function. It goes from being this personal guide for scattered, small communities, almost a survival handbook, to becoming a public imperial document, the foundation for an entire society. Its role just completely flips.
Now, you might think this alliance was a simple happily ever after story, but not so fast. It actually created a whole new set of really complex problems. And that brings us to this idea of power and legitimacy, because a new tension starts to build between the faith and the empire.
So yeah, this imperial turn completely changes the game. It doesn't solve any old conflicts. What it does is create a brand new central tension. And this isn't some small thing. It's a tension that's going to define Western history for like the next 1,000 years. The whole dynamic is just fundamentally and permanently altered.
And this really gets us to the heart of the problem, the core dilemma. So now that religion has this authority, what's its role? Is it supposed to act as a check on the emperor's power, to keep it from going too far? Or does it become a tool for that very same power, a way to stamp it with a divine seal of approval and say, God wants this? This question is everything in this new relationship.
So what did this actually look like on the ground? Well, the consequences were huge. For one thing, interpreting the Bible wasn't just something you did in your local community anymore. Nope. It became institutionalized in these big, official, state-sponsored councils. New church hierarchies popped up that looked a lot like the empire's own bureaucracy. And pretty soon, the Bible starts directly influencing Roman law, the education system, basically every part of public life. It gets woven right into the fabric of the empire.
Okay, so let's zoom out. What was the long-term fallout from this massive seismic shift? This is where we see how a civilization is born, because believe me, the legacy of what happened in the 4th century is still echoing today.
And really, this is the ultimate takeaway. After that imperial turn, the Bible isn't just a book for forming small communities anymore. From this moment on, it becomes a text that helps build entire civilizations. The scale of its influence just exploded.
And so we kind of end up right back where we started, with a question that has echoed down through history and honestly is still incredibly relevant right now. When you fuse faith with power, what do you gain? And maybe even more importantly, what do you lose? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me for this one.